on our end, and Terry's going to put us live now, so you can start whenever you'd like.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so welcome everyone to our electronic audit committee. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the committee is practicing physical distancing and everyone is participating electronically. I'll now look to the clerk for the roll call.
Thank you. Chair Redmond. I can see. Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
And Chair Jowett.
Present.
So that's everybody present.
Thank you, sir. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, their contributions to our community. Looking to see if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, we'll move directly into report 2.1. Mr. Dyer, if you'd like to kick us off, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And despite our continued focus on the 2022 plan and budget, we are also busily preparing for our 2021 year-end audit process. And so there are, on today's agenda, a couple of items related to our year-end audit plan. The first is a briefing note from staff outlining the mechanics, if you will, of how year-end will work and the various audits that are performed. I'll turn to Tricia Alpa, our Manager of Financial Services, to provide a brief overview of the report. And then our auditor from KPMG, Mr. Betik, is here, and he will provide the outline of KPMG's plan for the audit of the 2021 financial statements. So Ms. Alpa, over to you.
Good morning. So just to give you an overview of the briefing note, this report shares information on the audit of the region's 2021 financial statements, which will be presented to the audit committee in the spring. Treasury Services coordinates the year-end process. Key dates, which are similar to last year, is preliminary audit work by KPMG, which is currently underway and it's progressing very well. February 28th of 2020, the region's financial records will be closed so that financial schedules and the financial statements may be prepared for the audit. March 27 to 25 of 2022 is the audit by KPMG, again, consistent with previous years. And in April will be the presentation of the 2021 audited financial statements to the audit committee and approval of the financial statements by regional council. As background, the Ontario Municipal Act requires the preparation and publishing of audited financial statements annually. Last June, the region appointed KPMG as the auditor for the 2021 fiscal year end with the option to extend for 2 additional one-year terms, subject to explicit approval of the audit committee and regional council. Matthew Betik is the audit partner, and he's here today to make a presentation on the audit later in the agenda. KPMG will perform 18 separate audits, which is consistent with prior years, and the total cost of all the audit work is $155,630. It's included in the annual operating budget.
Okay, so thank you for that. So with that being said, Craig, do you want to continue with remarks, or shall I be moving forward to Matthew now?
So I don't have anything else to add, Madam Chair. So back to you in the committee if there's any questions of staff, and if not, turning it over to our colleagues from KPMG.
Perfect. Okay, Matthew, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to share my screen, which is the audit plan that was included in the agenda materials. So if I can just have somebody confirm that you can see that. Perfect. So thanks for inviting us today, and thanks to the committee and staff for our reappointment back in June of this year. We appreciate the opportunity, and we appreciate the confidence that the region has in our work as your auditor. We'll take a few minutes to walk through the audit plan, recognizing that the plan has been circulated as part of the agenda materials, and We're trusting that the committee members have at least had a chance to skim through it. As usual, I can take questions throughout, but there will be time for questions at the end. Here we've just got a brief snapshot of the key members or the senior members of our team. And with us at the meeting today is Courtney Cheel. However, I'm going to be doing the presenting today. Here's the executive summary. I won't touch on any of these because we hit on them later in the presentation. We do have to discuss the concept of materiality in the audit, and this is a conversation we've had in previous meetings. So we set materiality this year at approximately $30 million. And what that means is it has two purposes in a financial statement audit. First, it directs the scoping and the extent of testing that we will perform on the various accounts and transactions. So it's an initial numerical threshold that we look at. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it establishes the benchmark for which we will evaluate if there are any errors or corrections that are required in the financial statements. So we cannot permit accumulated or aggregated errors in excess of $30 million to occur in the financial statements and still give a clean audit opinion. Having said that, we've never come anywhere close to this figure, so it's not something that we run up against. We will communicate matters that we identified that are 5% of that figure, because that's a lower threshold that we apply. And then the final concept here is we often get questions around sort of the sheer size of that number, $30 million. It's a big number. And certainly the region will sort of manage its affairs to a much more precise level than $30 million. But when we look at it, we say, given that the revenues of the region are expected to be, close to $1.3 billion, should revenues or expenses be higher or lower by some number less than 30 million, would somebody looking at the financial statements from an outside perspective come to a different conclusion as to the size and scope of the operation? And I think when we look at it from that perspective, it makes a little bit more sense. Moving on to the next slide, we just re-summarize the various reports and audits that we do provide over the cycle. We are required to consider the risk of fraud in the audit, and the risk of fraud we talk about is the intentional manipulation or false representation of accounting records within the financial statements. We're not really talking about how the region may be a victim of fraud from outside sources. I just want to be clear on that scope. We are required to think about fraud from both a revenue perspective and an internal control perspective. And consistent with prior years and our audits of other municipalities, we're able to sort of dispense with the risk of fraud from a revenue perspective, because we don't really believe that there's a fraud risk there. Your revenues are either government grants or taxes based on impact data or user charges, which none of those are subject to that risk in our view. However, we are required to consider fraud from an internal control perspective, and we do have a response to that. We do look at whether there are significant unusual entries that get recorded through the accounts, and we have a variety of both manual and electronic tests that we look there. To the extent there are significant unusual transactions, we dive deep into those, and we also look at estimates and sort of do a look back review to see, did the estimates that were recorded in previous years come true, and were there any biases that were inherent in those? Historically, we've not found any issues in this area, and while we're required to consider the risk, we don't believe there's any cause for any elevated concerns. We do talk every year in our audit about post-employment benefits, and so these are both the health and dental benefits that are provided for early retirees. They're also the WSIB benefits as well as sick leave benefits. And the region uses a third-party appointed actuary to assist in the determination of those balances. And we rely on their work for the calculations, but we do our own work around the assumptions and the reasonableness of those assumptions, as well as testing the underlying data that third-party actuary uses. We also take a significant look at the tangible capital assets. So these are all the capital that the region has. It is the most significant item on the region's financial statements. And certainly as a municipality, you manage, literally over $1 billion worth of assets. We want to make sure those that have been recorded as capital are truly capital and vice versa, and that the recording of depreciation or amortization expense is also appropriate. The final item on the specific items of focus are obligatory reserve funds. And really what we're talking about is development charges primarily. And we want to make sure that those are recorded in accordance with the standards, and recalling that the development charges are recorded as revenue, not when the region collects the money, but when the region spends the money on the appropriate development project. And so there's a bit of an extra process that has to be undertaken by the Treasury team in order to get that right. And so we go through a number of steps on that. We also talked in the past, and we'll continue to look at the impact of waived development charges, because that has also an interesting impact to the financial statements. On this slide here, we just outline the timing of work and the key milestones and deliverables, which is consistent with what Tricia had presented earlier. And then on the final two slides, we go through a handful of new standards that are coming down the pipe with respect to the financial statement reporting, most notably the standard for asset retirement obligations and the one for public-private partnerships. So with that, to the chair, I will cease our formal comments, but be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Betik. I'm looking to see if anyone has their hand up, and it's difficult when we're sharing the screen. So
I will stop sharing now.
No worries. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands up at this point, Mr. Betik. So that being said, I believe the next on the agenda here is Kim Bellissimo to introduce the report. Kim, are you there?
So.
Oh, sorry, Matthew.
Did you to the chair, then, are we moving on to the next agenda item? If that's the case, then I think that's our time to step off.
Right. Thank you for that. Yes.
Okay.
So thank you very much. And I believe you're coming back, correct?
I don't know.
Okay, so maybe I can just jump in, Chair Jowett. Yeah, so we'll hear back from Matthew and Courtney likely in April when they come back with the results of all the work that they'll be doing over the next 4 months or so. Okay, thank you so much for that. Much appreciated, Mr. Betik. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see everybody else here. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
I was just going to suggest I not stay on until April.
I won't stay on the line till April. I have a few other things to do.
You turn your cameras off, though.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now. You have the floor, Kim.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, David Young is going to provide us with an overview of the note. And then, of course, we'll be available to answer any questions. So thank you, David.
I'm going to pass it off to Amber to go through the scope, and then I'll come back with the key findings.
Thanks. So this fraud risk assessment was a somewhat more in-depth review, looking for potential for fraud within the procurement and accounts payable processes, above and beyond what was covered as part of the year-end review outlined in the previous presentation by KPMG. As part of the assessment, there was a review of business processes, inherent risk associated with those processes, the level of significance and likelihood for occurrence within the risk, within those processes, and looking at all the internal controls to minimize those risks. There was also opportunities identified for improvement to address gaps in the existing internal controls. The outcome of the assessment was a list of 24 recommendations made by the vendor, none of which ranked as medium or high risks associated with this process. If there's any specific questions on the recommendations made, I'll hand that over to David to field those, given his his overview of the audit process, but that's the general overview of the risk assessment that was performed.
Okay, so thank you for that, Amber. So we'll go straight to you then, David. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
The only thing that I would add is that the region, the third-party consultants, when they looked at the internal controls and accounts payable and procurement, they did conclude that we do have indeed adequate controls to prevent and detect fraud. In terms of next steps, implementation of these recommendations will require involvement from multiple departments, and a plan will be put together to address and implement the recommendations.
Okay, much appreciated. Okay, so I'm looking around to see if there are any questions on this particular portion. So maybe I want to ask either one of you, Kim, David, or Amber. I'm trying to get my head around transfer payments, and I know I don't know a lot about it. I just know that it's interdepartmental. Are we using best practice methodologies for our transfer payments? And it's a naive question, so please take no offense to it. Maybe that one is a Craig question. I think so, Mr. Dyer?
I can certainly give it a try, Madam Chair. And just to make sure I'm understanding, when you refer to transfer payments, so we use that terminology in a couple of different ways. One is the exchange of funds between the region and senior levels of government. It's also used occasionally in terms of payments by the region to service providers. So is it one or both? Did you have something specific in mind?
No, actually, maybe I'm using the wrong terminology. I'm more referring to the interdepartmental exchange for services provided by department to department. What would you call that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we would refer to that as usually as an interdepartmental charge. It's a good question, and we have a system in place where we allocate costs, and let's use an example of an administrative department, where an administrative department is charged back to a frontline service delivery department, and we do that for two different purposes. The first is to ensure that from a user fee perspective or user rate perspective, that the total cost of providing the service is ultimately recovered. So for example, we have chargebacks into the water and wastewater budgets for finance, for IT, for HR, for legal, in order to allocate our costs and make sure that we're setting our user fees at the most appropriate rate. That's the first reason. The second reason is where there is provincial funding at stake. So if we use, let's say, paramedic services as an example, where 50% of our costs are funded by the province, we want to make sure that we have included in those costs an appropriate amount of internal staff's, internal departmental support. So an internal charge, again, between those areas, HR, legal, finance, IT, and others, into paramedic services. And then that forms part of our budget submission to the province to ensure that we're getting an appropriate amount of subsidy. So those are primarily the two places and reasons where we would do an internal charge. Those charges are reviewed on an annual basis as we go through the budget process.
I understand completely the rationale for doing them. I just wanted to make sure we're doing the best work we can on, and it looks like we want accuracy of recovery, right? So we're incented to do a good job of it. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that any other? Oh, I see, Councillor Galloway.
Thanks, Helen. So I'm really pleased with this report and that we had it done. Fraud is always a major concern. We've had the very, very occasional incidents of them in the past, but certainly one that can not just involve financial assets, but reputational assets as well. So it's really good that we've done this. So it's also very good that our consultant indicated that it's relatively low risk given their environmental scan of our systems. So that's good to hear as well. But nonetheless, we can't let our guard down. So there are 24 recommendations in the report. I think, David, you referred to in the appendix. And I noticed that the report indicates that staff will be working on all of them. And I'm wondering whether or not we'll get, that is, the audit committee will get some kind of an ongoing update on the progress, whether that's David's question or Craig's question, an update annually maybe on the progress on those recommendations.
So through you, Madam Chair, perhaps I'll give this a try, and Mr. Young may want to add something as well. So the implementation of a fraud risk management framework that takes into account the recommendations from the consultant is high on the list of priorities as we head into 2022. At this point, I expect that both Kathy Deschamps and Tricia Alpa, who are both on the line, will play a key role from a finance perspective in putting that framework in place, along with input and representation from other areas of the corporation. And in terms of reporting back to audit committee, I would say we're absolutely in your hands. I think from our perspective, an annual update to audit committee, at least at some point next year, on the progress that we've made with respect to implementation is entirely in order. And we'd be happy to do that if it's helpful to the committee.
Well, speaking personally, I think, given the oversight role that the audit committee has, and, now we're being made aware of this particular program, which is all very good. I think as one member of the audit committee, at least, I think we should be getting an update on some basis annually, I think would probably be sufficient.
I didn't hear. Bruce? Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, to Councillor Galloway's point, at least annually, and we're looking at how often this committee meets, whether we need to add in another committee meeting, and we'd be happy to provide an update even sooner than that. The team will be updating me, obviously, as Mr. Dyer said, this is high on our priority list, and we could even do an email update in advance if needed. But for sure, there will be a link back to this committee and reporting.
I think that's a good idea, Bruce. Even if so, all these improvements that are being made, I think our whole council needs to hear about them. Some of the good news doesn't always make it right to council members, so that's good to hear. Okay, so where are we in all of this? Mr. Dyer, I think, Kim, is there anything else you want to add, or are you?
No, thank you very much. We conclude our update.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. And I have now, Mr. Dyer, I have 3.1 as Mr. Betik coming back in, but it's not necessary now, is it?
No, it's not, Madam Chair. You've dealt with that item, and I think all the items on the agenda at this point.
So there's no information or correspondence. There's no other business. So I am looking for a motion to adjourn unless anyone has any other statements or comments. Okay. Oh, please do. Okay, Chair Redmond.
I was moving adjournment.
Perfect. Okay. Well, it's not over till we do that. So can I have a seconder, please? Seconded by, thank you, Councillor Galloway. All those in favor? Any opposed? No. Okay. All right. Thanks again. Very comprehensive and quick.
I got all 3 of my kids coming to one